So there's a milestone moment in every American family's life, and it's not really getting married or having their first child. It's owning a minivan. So a few years ago, we owned our first minivan, and as I was driving my younger son to his preschool, I was taking him without drinking my morning coffee, which I have been told is a crime in a few countries. And I drove to his preschool, dragging my feet, closing my eyes, and I am signing him in, and I walk him out, or I walk out myself. I left the child inside. I walk out, and I got inside the minivan, and I tried to turn it on, but the key wasn't working. So I took it out, I looked at the key again, and I tried to turn it in again, and it still wasn't working. So I looked at my surroundings, and I suddenly realized that the interior of the vehicle wasn't the same one that I came in. And when I looked outside, the actual owner of the vehicle was crossing his hands, crossing his arms with a frown on his face, wondering what the heck I was doing inside his car. So I had to just apologize profusely and try and convince him that I wasn't trying to steal his vehicle. And that was the day I realized the importance of paying attention. Now you see, I believe that we are living through an economic crisis today. And it has nothing to do with the crash of the stock market or the devaluation of national currencies, but it has everything to do with an economic crisis of attention. You see, I believe that attention is today's most valuable currency. And you might think that I'm going a little bit too far by calling attention a currency, but think about it for a minute. The first characteristic of a currency is that it is in limited supply. Once you wake up in the morning, you only have enough attention to spend on a certain number of things. And our attention collectively as a society is limited by the number of members in society and the number of time that each one of us has. Attention is also valuable. It's also desirable in the marketplace. And there are professions that are built, such as musicians and artists, that are built upon the notion of attracting attention from others. Attention is also a commodity in the marketplace, and there are industries such as advertising and public relations that depend on generating human attention. And finally, the last characteristic of a currency is that attention can be used as payment for value. And in this context, I want to be very clear that I'm talking about valuable ideas and experiences that can be, quote unquote, purchased through the investment of your attention. Now, one of the things that I want to just impress in your mind is that when you wake up in the morning, it's almost like an attention wallet that you wake up with. You have a certain amount of attention that you can invest in different ideas and experiences, and in the best of cases, ideas and experiences that are valuable, that help bring us together, that help move us forward. And this is our responsibility, to invest this attention wisely. Now, in fact, there is a cryptocurrency project called the BAT, or Basic Attention Token, that is seeking to monetize or give monetary value to our attention, and creating a marketplace between users, advertisers, and publishers so that they may transact with one another with the attention that primarily the users have available. So this notion of attention as currency is gaining steam in today's fast-moving environment. But what we're seeing is that our attention is being exploited today. And there are exploits that are causing concern in people like us that are paying attention to the situation. There are exploits that I'm going to continue explaining further. But before I do, you might find it ironic that someone like I, who makes their living off of advertising, and advertising being a commercialization of human attention, is the one standing here and warning you about misutilizing attention. But I want to believe that I'm part of a movement of honest advertisers that is seeing the problem for what it is, and seeing that some things definitely need to be changed and need to be fixed. For example, if we look at recent stats, we can find that the average American per day is watching 270 minutes of television every single day. Now, even in an era of Netflix and YouTube and other forms of video, if we take that, and by the way, for those mathematically impaired like I am, 270 minutes amounts to 4.5 hours of television per day. So if we count between 13 and 15 minutes per hour of television watched, that amounts to 4 years in the average lifespan of a US adult just watching advertising messages. And if you agree with that is not correct. That's something that we need to look at closely. But is this enough to call the situation a crisis? Just because there's an excess of advertising or other types of messages? Well, there are two phenomena that I want to look at very quickly that I believe are very concerning in today's environment. And the first one is what I like to call the spendthrift syndrome. Now, in personal finance, a spendthrift is a person who cannot have any money in their pockets or in their hands, because as soon as they have it, they spend it. It's an addiction to spending. And if there's anybody here in the audience with that spendthrift syndrome, please don't raise your hand. We don't want to expose you. Sorry, a little bit too late. But in personal finance, that would be a spendthrift, but in the economics of attention, a spendthrift would be a person that cannot hold their focus for long. They're quickly distracted. And we're seeing this phenomenon more and more, particularly in the younger generations. You've probably heard the saying that today our attention is equal to that of a goldfish, and that's what some specialists have tried to just give kind of a metaphor to the problem of keeping focus and keeping attention. And in fact, there are stats that seem to support this. For example, the level of ADHD, which psychologists call attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the growth of cases in US children is 42% in the last 8 years. Now, this is a concern, particularly when nannies have been replaced by iPads, video games, and television screens, and YouTube on autoplay. This is a concern, and we're teaching our kids the personal finance equivalent of breaking their piggy bank, taking their coins, and just shoving it at anybody who passes by. That's in the economics of attention, what we're teaching them. But the other phenomena that I want to look at is the plummeting quality of signals out there, the plummeting quality of content that is competing for our attention, right? There is a sociological phenomena called the Parkinson's law of triviality. And this just spells out that our human tendency is to invest the majority of our time on matters of very low relevance. And on the other hand, we invest very little time on matters that are critical. And they exemplify this phenomena in a business meeting setting, where let's say they meet for 2 hours. 1.5 hours are going to be spent discussing the color of the drapes, which brands of coffee should we buy, and who is on vacation and did you enjoy your holiday. Yet only 30 minutes are going to be spent talking about the actual critical matters that were on the agenda for that business meeting. And if you've ever wondered why some business meetings are so boring, this is a hint to that effect. So it's irresistible, but one of the things that we want to talk about as a way of example is the 2016 election period, and I know it's a painful topic. I know we all want to leave it behind, but stick with me for a second. The 2016 election might as well have been renamed 2016 fake news, because this was the keyword that was heard even to this day, that was passed around again and again. And I want to be very clear that when I talk about fake news here, I am not talking about pointing your finger at a news entity that goes against your political ideology and just calling it fake news. In this context, I'm talking about real fake news. For example, Mark Zuckerberg, this is a site called The Shovel. Mark Zuckerberg, dead at 32, denies Facebook has a problem with fake news. So he's dead and he's making a declaration from the grave. Take that. Another example, Obama signs bill forgiving all student loan debt. Any students in the audience? Rejoice. This fake news says that you do not have to pay. And then the last example is one of my favorites. Fake news epidemic turns out to be fake news. So fake news says that there's no fake news. This is awesome. So this is not a problem according to fake news sites. However, a study by Stanford University says that during the 2016 election period, there were around 40 million shares of fake news items on social media. 40 million shares, which led to about 760 million click-throughs to fake news websites. And this impacted 70 million Americans. That's about 21% of our US population. Now, I want you to let that settle in for a little bit. Our last election period, the 2016 election period, was decided on about 80,000 votes sprinkled across 3 swing states. And yet we have 1/5 of our population, of our voting population, being impacted by fake news items that are captivating their attention. But it only gets worse from here, because more stats show that the fake news items actually reached a higher level of engagement, and in social media and digital media, we call engagement likes, shares, comments, et cetera, by election day, the fake news items had more engagement than items that were generated from entities with journalistic integrity. So not only were the culpable party here the fake news sites, but people like you and I were responsible for sharing this information along and making the situation worse. So in this attention economy, we're seeing fraud, we're seeing counterfeit, we're seeing the same situations that we see in any other type of economy. And this, you'll agree by now, that is a matter of concern. Now, I believe in much more than just complaining about the issue. I believe in much more than just pointing our finger at the problem. And I believe in doing something about it. But what do we do? Now, if we had a personal finance crisis, we would boil it down. We can talk about many, many different tips on how to improve this situation. But we would boil it down to 2 actions to look into. And these are the same actions that I want to propose that we look into in the crisis of human attention. And it's simply looking at our income and our expenses. And I'm going to talk about each one individually in the context of the economics of attention. But first, let's talk about expenses. And by expenses, what I mean is the collection of ideas and experiences that we are investing our daily attention wallet into. So what are we investing? What are we spending our attention on, right? Now, I agree that we have to keep news entities, social media, digital media, we should keep them accountable for containing in some manner the barrage of fake news and misinformation that is out there. But I also believe that we need to elevate our standards, because these news entities and media entities, being for-profit organizations, they are driven by increasing shareholder value. And the way they increase shareholder value is by attracting more attention. So if we as a community, we tell these entities that we've had enough and that we expect something higher, we expect more pure information, then they, sooner or later, will have to comply. But the other aspect that I want to look at is our income. Now, by income in this context, what I'm thinking about is the ideas that we expose, the idea that we share forward, the ideas that we pass along in exchange for our social circle's attention, or in whichever circle that we have influence over. So what ideas are we selling, quote unquote, to others so that others may invest their attention in us? Now, in this era in which we, with a supercomputer in our pocket, which over a double macchiato, you can spread ideas around the world in a matter of seconds, we have the power of being mini media entities. And think about the responsibility that you and I have in the moment of sharing an idea. So my question to you is, wouldn't it be hypocritical if we demand of social media, of digital media, of news entities, we demand a level of standard that we as individuals don't comply with, I think it would be hypocritical. And I think that the same standards that we apply to them must be applied to us in such a manner in which we think before sharing, before forwarding that information, we think about it 1 or 2 times. You think we could do that? So accountability certainly goes both ways, both in the media entities, the people, the entities that have wide reach to this huge population, but also we, even on an individual one-to-one basis, we can all do better. So to wrap things up really quickly, there are just a few things that I want to say. There's a Japanese proverb, an ancient Japanese proverb, that goes, Ino naka no kawazu, taikai wo shirazu. And what it means is the frog inside the well cannot see the great ocean. And in Spanish, we have a saying that goes, camarón que se duerme, se lo lleva la corriente. And that means the shrimp that falls asleep is swept away by the current. And from very disparate cultures for centuries and centuries, it seems like we have embedded this idea that our attention and our focus is a matter of prime importance. And my hope is that we invest our attention wisely so that we do not get swept by the currents of misinformation, bad ideas, and we can stand and look at the expansive ocean of ideas that matter, ideas that help bring us together and help us move forward. And at the very least, so that we don't wind up in somebody else's vehicle. So today you've invested a little bit of your attention wallet in my talk, and for that reason, thank you.